There's never a boring week in Australian football, even when we're still 90 days out from the start of a new A-League season. FA's second division has hit a fork in the road, their own deadlines missed, promises unfulfilled, and uncertainty spreading quickly. The 24-25 A-League fixtures will be released in the coming weeks, but for now we at least have the structure of the competition to run our eyes over. A 13th team gets us closer to pure home and away scheduling, but not all the way as the Triple Derbies return. So does Unite Round, and with a facelift as well. Significantly more planning time has allowed for a rejigged version of the grand final deal replacement, as the APL gives the idea a run before it decides if it should be a permanent fixture on the Australian calendar. The Mariners move to replace some of their treble heroes amongst a very busy few days in the transfer window. Melbourne City get their draw in the Women's Asian Champions League, and the Socceroos are finally heading back to Adelaide on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast, supported by Deploy Football. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me for the first time in a little while, guess who's back? It's Chris Macpherson. Hello.
Evening, Lockie.
Yes, great to have you back after a little stint away. I do welcome back Jacob Stevens as well. Great job without me on the podcast while I was a little away. I don't think we've done one of these since. I could be losing track. I do that all the time.
No, I don't think we have. It was me and Christian holding down the fort for a little while there, a couple episodes. But yeah, we got through it, so.
Nicely done. And Christian, we did have someone comment on the latest episode of the podcast, just hoping that you and I had hugged and made up after our Euros chat the other day, talking about Gareth Southgate. But I hope you're not afraid to get stuck into it again today. All right, let's get stuck into the news. And the big story this week is that the future of Football Australia's new national second division is in doubt. Now, there's been a lot of mail on this throughout the week. I'm going to do my best to take you through it as it happened. On Monday, there were rumours spilling out and quickly retracted suggesting that the NSD will be further delayed beyond 2025. On Tuesday, Vince Rigari reported that the NSD was set to be scrapped, at least in its current proposed format, due to a shortage of suitable teams. Sources that weren't authorised to speak publicly said that the recent expansion process was unable to find the additional 2 or 4 teams that were promised to get the competition off the ground. However, FA did remain committed to running some form of second tier in 2025. How they're going to do that without a home and away league? Well, the Champions League style model has been floated again as an alternative. Teams would essentially remain in their MPLs, but play in another cup competition towards the end of their season. The clubs themselves weren't said to be too happy about that idea. On Wednesday, Paul Williams published an interview with James Johnson, who reaffirmed that a second tier will exist in 2025. He did concede, however, that the format is now up for debate. He used the example of the Brazilian structure here, where the second tier is played at a state level and then it filters nationally at the back end, which is kind of what this Champions League model was proposing to do. However, the confirmed club's disliking of this model was reaffirmed on Thursday, when chairman of the Association of Australian Football Clubs, Nick Galatas, said to FTBL that that model would not float amongst the clubs that have been confirmed to participate. Thursday also was the beginning of a 2-day Football Australia board meeting, according to Vince Rigari, to decide their next moves. They will then need to communicate that to the clubs, and news will follow from there. Chris, there's a lot of meat in that. The bottom line basically is that there is roadblocks on the way to this competition getting up in March and April of next year.
I'd love to say I'm surprised, Lockie. Who would have thought something run by either Football Australia or the APL would run completely smoothly? But it's one of those pieces. There's so many moving pieces to it. We've talked about it before, and it's been addressed at length. The variables, obviously, you've got the offsetting season to the A-League. You've then got, the steps to become promotion relegation. It was never going to be smooth. We saw that with the list of clubs that they're nominated. It didn't reflect a national being the first letter of that anagram. Second tier, really, it was a Eastern Seaboard second tier. There's lots of challenges. There's conflicted entities with their, depending on who's got their nose or hands in which trop or pie or however you want to analyse it, with, state bodies making threats against teams that nominate, etc. There's so much in terms of politics and moving pieces here that it was never going to be smooth. And the compressed timeline that Football Australia admirably from some viewpoints we're trying to get to just didn't seem achievable. And, they've fallen at their own timelines, which is a key piece here, which is, again, no surprise. I'm not sure whether it's brave or silly from James Johnson to suggest that, 2025 is happening and essentially clubs are just going to almost do what they're told, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, the bottom line, Jacob, is that they've already pushed back this league by a year, and that was pretty universally declared as a correct decision because just such a big factor of the future of Australian football is going to be this second tier, and getting it right is very important for the next 50 years, not just the next 12 months. However, given that extended time frame, they've now also missed their own deadline. The conclusion of the expansion phase was supposed to be to June. We're now well into July. We haven't heard any news. We expect, hopefully, after this board meeting concludes, perhaps next week, that we'll hear something. But the early news isn't good.
Yeah, and it probably won't surprise anybody to hear that I've been overly pessimistic about the National Second Division since it was basically announced. I've never had a huge amount of faith that it will, not just be successful, but even exist in any form. But, putting that to the side, it's, as Chris touched on, just kind of unsurprising, a bit disappointing. And I think it's a thing that I say this all the time, but football in Australia has a massive ego problem. And with a lot of these clubs, they're still sort of, I guess, this is their last chance to sort of clutch at the relevance that they had back in the 80s and the 90s that they themselves destroyed slowly over time. And they're trying to relive those glory days. And it's people that are just still attached to that. And is that the best thing for Australian football? I just don't know that it necessarily is. I want it to go well if it does get up, because it's going to be great for Australian football to have a second tier. Obviously, basically every country in the world has a second division of some sort, and Australia really doesn't have that. So if we can nail it, it would be fantastic. But yeah, just not sure that in its current form, in any of the proposed forms, anything like that, it would actually be successful. But on your point of this sort of expansion phase, Lockie, the interesting thing is obviously the finances is the big question mark, right? I believe that what's been reported as sort of like the security that the clubs have to pay down is about $500,000.
So it's actually a million. So there's a
It's a
million that is
million.
the 500,000 that is the license fee, but then there is also 500,000 that is a bank guarantee to ensure sustainability to a certain level.
So there you go, even more unachievable for a lot of clubs. I mean, when you've got the professional league in the country is struggling financially, you're then putting this massive financial burden on local clubs to be able to get that sort of revenue. And they might be able to do that on a one-off of going, look, we're going to take a punt and try and do it. And they might get a couple of backers here or there. But, is that a sustainable thing over time, as Christian has just turned upside down? Anyway, what was I talking about? The finances, that's right. So yeah, it's a big financial burden for these local clubs, and I have actually spoken to a couple of people, at least here in SA, that have been associated in some capacity with the National Second Division. I spoke to the chairman at Playford City, who were one of the SA teams to put in an expression of interest in the first round way back when, a couple of years ago, and I had a chat with him about it, and he was saying that was really the big sticking point, was finding sponsors and finding people to get on board, because it's all on this hypothetical of, well, if it does get up and it does go well, this might be what we see. But there were absolutely no guarantees at the time. From what he told me, there was a lack of communication from the FA. Surprise, surprise. It just sort of seems to me that it's going to be difficult to find these expansion teams, because, yeah, as James Johnson has now come out and said, there's no guarantee of what the tournament's even going to look like. It's been suggested and rumoured at least on social media, that a couple of the clubs that have been selected potentially are balking a little bit at the amount of money that they have to front up. Whether or not that's true, we don't know, can't confirm anything, but it does seem like that's the really big sticking point, is finances. And as I said, when the professional league is struggling, how are you going to be able to find expansion teams for the second professional league that hasn't even started yet, and we don't know what it's going to look like? So it does just seem like a complete mess at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know how much weight I put behind those rumours specifically about teams maybe wanting to go out, because the bar was set very purposely high to ensure that there was enough coverage there. And you are right, though, that the staggered format of announcing the 8 teams, then leaving the room for expansion was supposed to be, okay, we've got 8 teams, we have a competition. Some of that certainty is now there already. Who else wants to come in knowing that this competition is now on the way? But Chris, apparently it's not all on the way, even with the 8 teams.
Well, firstly, I just want to say I'm not sure what I'm more surprised about, a pessimistic Englishman or the fact that the Football Australia has failed to deliver on their promises, but and understandably so after the Euros. But it's a bizarre thing to think about, how it's come about, because exactly as you touched on, Lockie, it seemed like they were laying a foundation saying, look, we're going to go ahead with these 8 clubs. If there's more clubs that want to, now that they know there's a framework and this all exists, I personally thought that we were just going to end up with an 8-team competition and others would watch and wait and maybe try and join in year 2. But hey, look at it. At the end of the day, as Jacob touched on, there is a significant amount of money. Go and put $500,000 down for a license, have a $500,000 bank guarantee, and the great reward after spending the next 3 to 5 to 10 years travelling around the country playing in this national second division at your own cost is you can go into the A-Leagues if you get promoted and you can have $530,000 of distributions because the APL's hopefully still got that amount of money to give out.
Hopefully a little more than that.
Maybe less. Who knows with the APL?
Yeah. Well, so we heard, it was probably a couple of months ago now, noise about a Tasmania bid potentially being close to getting over the line. Vince's article suggested that only one potential additional club was found in this expansion process, and that was from Victoria, so it kind of throws that out the window a little bit. I guess the question most people are going to be asking is, so what if we don't get these expansion teams? Why can we not just go ahead with the 8 teams? The truth is, I don't think I have a perfect answer to be able to explain that. I'm guessing because the finances are so thin as they are, having that spread across multiple teams would be a much better thing. And, we're talking about Australia here. If there was an Adelaide team, a Tasmanian team, a Perth team, think about the amount of money that would cost to travel, and just to keep those expenses would just keep going up and up and up. So the more teams, the better in terms of spreading out some of those overheads as well. And you need a minimum amount of games for contracts, agreements for broadcast and stuff like that. So again, that's not a perfect answer, Jacob, but it just seems like as well an 8-team competition. You play 7 home and away, 14 games plus a final series. That's not quite the league that we're looking for as well. It's dangerously close to just a cup competition with a group stage.
Yeah, and it's like Chris touched on right at the start as well. It doesn't really feel very national when all the teams are based in, the same sort of area of Australia. And like I said, lucky there's nobody that a bit further afield. The Adelaides, the Perths. That, I think that's what people were hoping for, right? Was that it would be national, that you'd get at least one from every major city, a bit like it was with the A-League when the A-League started, right? You had one in each city, but that's obviously not been the case, and could be various reasons for it. But yeah, I mean, look, they do need the teams, but it goes back to the point that you made, Lockie, where was it a mistake to go, right, we're going to have the security of having at least 8 teams and then look to further expand that, but then not actually have anything prepared for if we only have those 8 teams, right? Because, this talk about potentially it becoming almost sort of like the Champions League format. I know the teams don't like that, and rightfully so, because they're entering into this with the mindset of it being a proper league competition. But if it does end up something similar to that, then, why did we do away with like the NPL, the national finals that was a thing a few years ago, which was a very similar format where the best teams from each state go and play each other in a knockout tournament. It all seems like there's a lack of direction now that this plan A hasn't worked. They've not potentially had the interest from the big clubs that they wanted, or they've not had, enough teams be able to meet the high standards that they've set, and they've gone, we don't have a contingency plan here, and they're sort of scrambling to find something. Chris, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's an interesting piece you touch on there with that sort of ceiling they've put in place, or that threshold that these teams have got to meet, because by doing what they've done and announcing those 8 teams, they've also made a rod for their back, because it's not like they can go and retreat that, even if it was to $350,000 in terms of the license fee or something else. Because could you imagine the furor from those other teams if they've committed to doing that, they've fundraised, they've done everything they need to to get to a stage of having $1 million essentially between guarantees and cash up front for them only to get there and sell a license a little bit cheaper. I mean, it's a little bit different because people might use the example of the APL and licenses selling at different prices, but that's a going concern selling at a different price, right? When we look at Perth or Newcastle or Auckland. The other thing I've wondered is obviously we've seen all the debacle with Canberra. Why the A-Leagues or the APL and Football Australia haven't possibly worked together and tried to utilise that as a proving ground for an establishment of an A-League team? Because we've talked about, we're on a short runway. A team like Canberra couldn't have got a team up and running. But if you had your next two expansion pipeline teams going into that competition potentially, all of a sudden you've got 10 teams. They've got a smaller runway, but they're able to put that team together. I know it's not perfect, but maybe it's an opportunity to get there and say, okay, it's a bit of a proving ground rather than just sending someone into a situation. Again, as Lockie touched on, I don't think there's a perfect solution to what this is. I think we're in a really poor situation. I personally, if I was running the Football Australia at the moment, I think knowing the locations of those 8 teams, I probably would have pushed ahead with a 21 or a 28 game season because travel wasn't going to be onerous. Someone wasn't going to Perth 3 or 4 or 5 times during a season. And I think having some product is better than no product, even if it means everyone plays each other 3 to 4 times. Because weirdly enough, that was kind of what the A-League was for a while there.
Yeah, so the status as we know it now is that FA don't have the teams they wanted and they're reconsidering the format, and the clubs themselves really want this home and away league. That's what they signed up for. They've been preparing to leave their NPLs. That's what they intend to do. Apart from that, we have to wait for the FA board meeting. Christian, how do you see this whole scenario at the moment?
Yeah, well, obviously I've missed bits and pieces of what you guys said, but I mean, it's really frustrating. Just you feel for the fans of the NPL clubs who were lined up to participate. I mean, since the NSL was abolished, they haven't really felt part of the football community to a certain extent. And now that this news is suddenly broken, I guess they have every right to feel aggrieved after so much excitement and anticipation. It's gotten to a stage once again where we're questioning, is the model ever going to be sustainable, not only to succeed, but actually get off the ground in the first place? And you touched on it before at the start, Lockie, how we can't be planning just for 12 months for a succession plan. It has to be sustainable for the next 50 years and beyond. So, I mean, also with the APL don't really have a say, with this second tier. It's Football Australia that's having to do the work on this. So I just don't agree with 2 governing bodies being responsible for different roles, whether it's the A-Leagues with the APL, Football Australia with this sort of debacle that's unfolding in front of our eyes. We all need to be on the same page. Otherwise, I just don't see how in the long term it's going to really eventuate to work in any sort of capacity. Because we're just going to keep seeing these bumps along the road. And, for all parties concerned, it just isn't good.
Pauletti, we've been talking for ages about getting this 5-a-side team for Roundball FC, starting our footballing empire. We want to do it soon. How can we get started?
Well, I think that we need to partner with Deploy Football. They're one of only 2 Australian brands to ever receive a FIFA Quality Pro license for its equipment, and they're proudly Australian owned and operated since 2012.
Seems like a no-brainer. And they offer clubs access to the best value for money for their footballs, teamwear, and their equipment. We'd be mad not to line up with Deploy.
Yeah, and with a quick 15-day turnaround, we could be up and ready by Unite round to get this 5-a-side crew going.
Sounds like the start of a footballing empire. They partner with all of the associations from Football New South Wales to Football West so we can take on anywhere in Australia after we succeed at Unite round. How are we going to get this started?
Well, I reckon that we need to head to deployfootball.com and take advantage of their bulk pricing. I don't know about you, but given how rusty I am, I reckon I'm probably going to sky a couple of balls. So I think we might need to make sure that we've got plenty ready to go.
Lock it in, Deploy Football.
I just actually want to touch on what you just said there, Christian, about having these 2 governing bodies, because that's exactly what happens in England. You have the EFL who run Premier League through to League 2, and then you have the FA who are in charge of the FA Cup and all of non-league football, which is the majority of football in England if you're looking at player base and clubs and all that sort of stuff. And look, it's not a perfect relationship, it's a bit dysfunctional at times, but they make it work. I think that there's no reason why it can't work here, having two governing bodies, doing this sort of stuff. And Lockie and I spoke about it on the pod a while back about how there do at least seem to be attempts at collaboration now moving forwards between the two. And I think that this league could be a good point of sort of bringing together a little bit of that discourse and going, right, we know that to really promote football in Australia, to make it a better product, we need this second division. How can we work together to make it happen? And that's not something that we've actually seen yet, because FA are pretty staunch on being, this is our product, this is our thing. I think if they actually do open it up a little bit and go, look, clearly we're struggling a bit here, do you have any suggestions? Can you help out in any sort of way? I know that they're probably not going to do that because they don't want to lose as much control as they have over it, right? This is their baby. This has been, they're in the works since they lost the A-Leagues. But, it could be a potential area where this collaboration does come into action a lot earlier than a lot of us might have expected. And it could be a sort of good test bed to see where these two bodies are at and whether they do actually want to work together to make Australian football better.
I think something just to raise really quickly is we're looking at ourselves in comparison to a lot of other countries that have very different geographical, very different football backgrounds, cultures, percentages. Would we not be well off? And I don't know if they have. I'm just going to assume based on where we've gotten to that they either have done so in very quick passing or not. Looking at some of the other leagues that have either failed or succeeded at a second tier level in other sports within Australia, because obviously our geography and our demographics present a very different challenge to nearly every other country. Most other countries our size, look at the US, they've got inland cities that are, of significant, volume and, population to be able to draw crowds, etc. So do we look at a model like the NBL one, and you touched on it before, Jacob, like that state-based, even if it's quasi-state-based where it might be, New South Wales and Victoria, Queensland, you might have conferences and they might be unequally represented as an initial stepping stage. And it might be that the end goal is to actually get to a national second tier. But if we have a national second tier that has 3 or 4 conferences with home and away, and then some step out at the end of the season from the top teams, because at the moment, I just don't see how they get what they're doing at the moment to work. Does anyone else see that we get to 2025 and this is going to work in a seamless way, the way that they're proposing it to?
No. But look, I take your point about looking at other sports. You would hope that they've done their due diligence in that aspect. In terms of the regionalised thing, I think a lot of people would argue that's what we've already had. You got the state leagues, the NPL, and then they've had this national kind of final series towards the end of the campaign. And maybe it's a stepping stone to something bigger, but I just think the clubs want more. And maybe this is going back to, Jacob, your point earlier, that these clubs, particularly the NSL clubs and plus Avondale as well, they just want to be back on that national stage. It's almost not a question of financial viability or performance or anything like that. It's that they deserve to be there. And look, I'm 24 years old. I've pretty much only known the A-League. I'm not going to tell you if that's a right or wrong thing to think, right? But they want to be on the national stage. They want to have their own league. And let's not forget as well that the APL have come the other way a little bit. They've proposed FA a little while ago, potential ideas for how you can involve teams from the national second tier coming up into the A-League, promote the best teams. If you get enough, then you have an A-League 1 and A-League 2, which can somehow merge this kind of licensing system with the A-League to the traditional club format. I think there is a lot of collaboration, and Jacob, you said it as well. FA and the APL are working together. It's tricky. You're right. There's so many people in football pulling in so many different directions. The clubs just want it so badly. The FA are trying to be fiscally responsible. Christian, it's just so hard to figure out what the right thing to do is.
Yeah, and Jake was talking before about the Premier League and EFL being two separate governing bodies. In this instance here, we're trying to create a second tier that hasn't even got off the ground yet. It's going to have to be created from scratch. Whereas, in England, they've already established themselves well ahead as the best league in the world. Some of the best people at the helm. Whereas in our situation, we've got people who, some aren't even football people. They're just there for the business side of it, the finances. There's so many arguments in and amongst it. And
the
like
same
I said,
is true in England.
Yeah, but not to the same extent. Like I said, to get a new league, running, you need to have a lot of stars aligning. People have got to be on the same page. There just have to be one clear goal at the end, and that's where it becomes really tricky to, I guess, analyze it all and see where the end road is. Yeah, it's very tricky.
All right. Yes, very tricky indeed. There'll be plenty more of this as the board meeting concludes. We'll hear more news from FA soon. We have plenty more to get through today, so we will leave that there. But the structure of the 24-25 A-League seasons has been confirmed. For the men, it's their 20th year, of course. The season will kick off on October 18th. Now, we guessed about this a little while ago, but it will be a 29-round season. That's 2 more than last year. But of course, with the bye, that gets pegged down to 26 games per team, which is 1 less than the season just gone. So you're going to have 12 games home and away proper, then 1 neutral game at Unite round, and then 1 extra as well, plus the 3 byes and the regular 4-week final series throughout May. So the interesting thing, I think, out of this, before we know the exact fixtures, is where the APL is choosing to draw the line between scarcity of fixtures and really cashing in on them. So in the last season, we had 5 triple-up fixtures. This season, we're only going to have 2, and 1 is Unite round. So we know that the F3 Derby and the Sydney Derby are going to be played in Unite round. So we're going to have 3 of all those big inner city derbies. I imagine that extra bonus round you'd have to think would have a Melbourne Derby and a Kiwi clash with a K as well. I'm getting in early on that one. But those main kind of city and country rivalries are getting cashed in on, which makes sense. The money argument is always there. I don't have to explain that. But then those kind of tier 2 rivalries, and this is the line that gets drawn. I'm thinking the Big Blue and the original rivalry, the big ones, they will be 2 per year. 1 home, 1 away, and that's it. They're the ones that are getting conserved. And Chris, I think that's quite a good balance.
I think it is. I mean, you could get there and sort of start to split hairs and want to have everything. But as the old line goes, you can't have your cake and eat it. So you can't complain that we've either got, burnout or oversupply and, under demand, but then also try and, have that situation where you're getting 3 of every rivalry because, there's certain teams out there in the A-Leagues that every other team doesn't like and has a rivalry with. So if you're one of those big clubs, then, realistically, you on that logic by your fans, you'd have to play extra games. And it's not going to be perfect. We know that. There's 13 teams that, it's unlucky for some, and it's certainly unlucky if you're trying to put a draw together. It's a challenge, and we've seen that already with the feedback, I'll call it, as the mild of terms from this small cluster of City fans who are very upset that they're not coming to Unite round.
Yes, very true. I imagine one of the other games will get Western Sydney versus Macarthur is one I also imagine will probably get a triple up. But apart from that, it's a bit up in the air. They have some kind of charity game. I think they started this year, so maybe that's one.
Would Western Sydney and Sydney not be the triple up?
Well, that's going to be in Unite rounds. They got 1 extra.
Of course. Yeah, my apologies.
So another thing that came out of today with this whole fixturing is that Football Australia have released their 24-25 domestic match calendar, which kind of brings in everything in Australian football. There's a couple of little bits of information in there as well. We're going to have midweek football returning in some form. The A-League men's competition will be 33 competition rounds, if we're talking about, regular season plus finals, into 31 weekends. So the total is 33, but you take 2 out for the FIFA windows. And so we're going to have to smash in, 12 extra games in there somewhere. Maybe they do it over summer. Christian, in the past, they've had that kind of condensed schedule around Christmas time, school holidays. Otherwise, we're going to have Tuesday nights, we're going to have Wednesday nights to get these games in as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, if those 2 rounds with the midweek, if they fall on school holidays or a date where you can attract as many fans as possible, I think it's a great move for the league. I'm a fan of games in midweek. I think it just gives that extra vibe, that extra feel about it. Instead of all the rounds being played on the weekends. You always get the odd 1 or 2 where it's been forced. Whether travel restrictions or weather or what have you. I think Macarthur had a couple of Monday night games last season, which worked really well. I thought there was a lot of good crowd that turned up, a lot of high numbers, where even Paletti was shocked by the numbers for a Monday night that they were able to attract so many fans, on basically a school night. So yeah, from that perspective, I'm looking forward to it, see how that all unfolds, and yeah, just hope that the fixturing and the teams are, I guess, aligned for the best possible scenario for those midweek fixtures.
Yeah, it's worth noting as well that those midweek rounds don't necessarily need to be played all at the same time. So I imagine there'll be games split up.
Yeah.
And my hope is that they're very carefully planned around buys as well. So if you imagine if Brisbane Roar has a bye 1 week, they play midweek against Macarthur, and then Macarthur have a bye the next week. Hopefully, if that makes sense to do and that's appropriate, then it kind of keeps the flow of the season going, and fans don't have to wait too long without their teams playing. The other really interesting little line that they've snuck into this document, they're talking about the DMC, the domestic match calendar, and how it organises competition at all levels to maximise opportunities for connection, sponsorship, improve player pathways, and Jacob, make possible a domestic transfer system. Now, this is something that's been talked about for a little while. I think this line is very encouraging. We know James Johnson really wants it as well. He's pushing for it at FA. We've talked about the benefits and how it'll incentivise longer contracts. Transfers between clubs will increase the value, more leverage for overseas transfers as well. I think this is really encouraging.
Yeah, and I don't think it's just the FA that wants it either. I would imagine that the clubs would be pretty keen to get it, and the players as well, because they'd see the benefits. It seems like one where there doesn't really seem to be any losers to a domestic transfer system. People go, oh, but the bigger clubs, they're just going to spend all the money and get all the best players from the other clubs, and it's like, yeah, well, they kind of just do that already anyway. But once the players are off contract, at least the clubs are getting a little bit back in return for developing these quality players, that are staying within the A-leagues. So yeah, I think it's a fantastic thing, and I really hope that it can come off. But again, it's one of those things where this has been talked about for so many years now, and we've just seen just absolutely no movement on it. And I get the idea of, okay, they're slowly getting there, aligning their calendars and things like that so that it makes it a bit more feasible. But yeah, I'll see it when I believe it. The other interesting thing as well from this is sort of continuing to reaffirm that the Australia Cup is a pre-season tournament, which, and I know we've spoken about a couple of times on like live streams and stuff about, teams don't necessarily take it as seriously as you'd like because it's a pre-season tournament. You only have that overlap really of the final and round 1, round 2, in terms of, overlapping with the actual regular season for the league. So a lot of teams sort of either just don't give it, perhaps the respect that it deserves as a competition, and there's these NPL teams who come in and give it absolutely everything, and it's like, yeah, these guys are treating it like a big competition because for them it is, right? It coincides nicely towards the back end of their season, but they're getting the chance to play against these A-League clubs, which we were talking about before, Lockie, these clubs wanting to be on the national stage. This is their chance to be on the national stage, and yet the A-League clubs are just sort of treating it as a bit of a kickabout because it's in their pre-season. They're not fully fit, and they don't even necessarily have their squads in order. They're still making transfers, making moves and things like that. So I think that's still, I think there could be a little bit of work around incorporating the cup better for both the NPL teams, potentially the NST teams, depending on how that looks and how that comes about, and then the A-League teams as well.
The hard part you're always going to have with that, Jacob, is obviously the misalignment of the two seasons, right? Like that we have a winter season. So the NPL sides do take it seriously, but you're never going to see a team probably below NPL. So we're not going to see those third-tier teams if they're having to play all the way through their summer, because most of those players are amateurs. So then to go and be having all of their season, and remembering what the qualification rounds look like as well for, some of these teams that might come through. They might play 5, 6, 7 games to get to the round of 32, should they progress any further. So if we're doing that, even if you're doing that during the season, it's still going to extend if a club manages to make a run to the quarterfinals, unless you start the Australia Cup in line with round 1 or round 2. Even then, it's going to lead these teams into November and December. And we've already seen the impact the professionals have when they play in the heat of summer. What's that going to have on amateurs when they play in the heat of summer? And I don't think there's a perfect solution outside of us aligning our seasons one way or the other, but we also know there's lots of other commercial reasons that probably doesn't work.
I've got a solution for you. You keep the Australia Cup where it is, then a League Cup later in the season for the start of the national second tier.
There we go.
I like that. I like that. We can have the NST teams and others can nominate too if they wish, if they're in the NPLs.
Yep, get more collaboration. Get more games as well for
More
professional
football.
players in the A-League. More football, absolutely. One more thing as well on the transfer system. It is worth noting that like these rules were brought in when the A-League was created to promote fiscal responsibility. Obviously, we are in an era of the A-League where there is not a lot of money, so it wouldn't make sense if this is still a few more years down the line, but it does feel like we are moving towards it. For the A-League women as well, their season will start 2 weeks after the men on the 1st of November. It'll be a 23-game season. The 12 teams, 11 home and away plus Unite round. Same 4 weeks final series starting in late April. And the grand final will be the weekend of the 16th of May, which is the men's semi-final leg 1, so a couple of weekends before. The only other interesting note here is that the dub will not stop for the November-December women's FIFA window. This is deliberate to get their season to start 1 week later and just allow a little more rest between both the Olympics that start this week and the Under-20 World Cup in September. So just allowing a little more break for those players. As we said, we will get those fixtures in the coming weeks. Christian, seems like a sensible move. Player welfare is important. If it means that we have to play through a window, so be it. And the Matildas will be playing in Australia as well, so the impact is limited.
Yeah, definitely. The player health and safety comes, first and foremost with this Olympic campaign about to come up. Just giving the players as much rest as possible. Hopefully, like you said, it won't impact the women's season a great deal. I mean, we saw last season where we saw a couple of the New Zealand players from Melbourne City were forced to go off on international duty. I think it was for qualifiers, if I'm not mistaken. But that City were forced to play on. There was no sort of break, and Vidicic was sort of tasked with having to scramble and change his sort of tactics and his system around to accompany those departures for those couple of games. But I mean, besides that, there shouldn't be a whole lot of scratching the head for coaches in the dub.
All right. The full details of Unite round have also been announced. There have been a number of changes since last year. The APL listened to feedback from fans and stakeholders. It's also abundantly clear that simply by a lack of planning time last year, there were a lot of things that they wanted to do that they perhaps couldn't. One of those things is having these marquee fixtures. So we've got the F3 Derby on Friday and the Sydney Derby on Saturday night. Because the fixture was already in place before Unite round last year, that just couldn't happen. So that's a positive move. This feels, Jacob, a lot more real. It feels like the APL's given it a real crack. It's the last year of the deal, so this is going to be the real tester to see if it's worth it or not for the APL to try and take it out to tender again and get some more money as well for a new deal.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just me as well, but there feels like there's an excitement about it as well because it is a bit more real. It doesn't feel like it was just sort of thrown together at the last minute because they had to get something together. It was a case of, they've had a chance now to evaluate what worked last year, what didn't work, what they wanted to do, and they've now been able to put that in place. And, it looks really, really promising. And I'm just hoping that outside of the football as well, that they're really focusing on how to, enhance the experience for fans outside of just the football on the pitch, because I know that was a big thing with their whole we're going to have this festival of football around the grand final in Sydney, and then they didn't really deliver on that front. I think this is a good opportunity for them to actually do something. It's over just the one weekend. Fans of every club are going to be in the city. Like, you've got a chance to actually really bring them together and do some fun things there. So I'm looking forward to any potential announcements on that front as well. But no, I'm really excited for it, and fingers crossed I'll be able to make it over for it, because I reckon it could be good fun.
So here's a breakdown of the changes. It's being moved forward from January to November. That's the 6th week of the season. I get a feeling that's because of the heat restrictions. We'll get onto that a little bit later. As I said, those big fixtures are coming in. The big one for me, I think, is that full season members get free access to their team's double headers, which is massive. People are already paying a lot of money to travel and to stay, accommodation and all that kind of stuff. I think free tickets for members is a big tick, helps reduce that barrier just a little bit. And also the men's and women's teams of the same club will be playing on different days as well. So fans of clubs will be able to go out and support both the men's and women's outfits. Chris, I see a lot of ticks there.
I see a lot of ticks. There's one eye of me that as soon as I saw the draw was one little cross, but when you look into all of the permutations, I'll let them have it for this one, which is the F3 derby on a Friday night. I'm just not sure that they really logically thought about Newcastle and Central Coast people travelling to Sydney on a Friday night. But hey, I guess I'll just have to take a day off work and make my way down there. And if the APL are listening and need a ground announcer for those games, well, they know where to find me.
I think the reasoning for the Friday night is that the Mariners are likely to play a midweek game for their Asian Champions League stuff, right?
Jacob,
Yeah.
again, my foot's firmly in the Newcastle camp, so my concern for Central Coast Mariners come around and walk there is like.
Very nice. Well, we've mentioned the big games. The others are Perth, Western, Brisbane, Adelaide, Wellington, Melbourne, Victory, and then Macarthur, Auckland. And then, of course, as was mentioned earlier, Christian, Melbourne City, the unlucky bye team in the men's comp. The quote here is, a decision reached by the APL after considering several factors when building the Isuzu Utes A-League fixture for 24-25. Doesn't give a whole lot of insight, that, does it?
It doesn't. I was going to say my number one theory would be, I don't know, a lack of fans, maybe 2 fans travelling up. Maybe is that the reason why? Or
I don't know, you tell me.
no, because like you said, with the quote, I mean, it's just, obviously I'm joking there, but they just don't really give much, do they, about, I'm just intrigued as to, they say several factors. I'm trying to...
Well, one of the things they've listed in their FAQs for Unite Round is that it was part of, yes, the fixture building process, but they also sought feedback from the clubs themselves. So it could be a case of City going, what's the point? We'll just stay at home for a week, thanks.
Interesting.
To be fair, at the end of the day, the APL is not going to come out and say if it is because Melbourne City are going to draw the lowest crowd. Like, it's just not a feasible thing. But what you would certainly hope that, whether it's from the clubs or the fans' point of view, irrespective of whether your fan base draws 30,000 or 2, to use Christian's number, that if this is a continuing endeavour, that in future years that is rotated if we're still in a situation where we've got an odd number of clubs. Because
you definitely think it had to be rotated because, I mean, you imagine there'd be quite a few clubs in that discussion to miss out. And I think, whatever those factors were determined by the APL, they've come to the decision that it's going to be Melbourne City to miss out this first season. I mean, hopefully we get, a couple of answers, soon, hopefully. But, interesting.
On the women's side of things, I should say, so all those men's games, we have a twilight game and then a night game, and then on the Sunday, there's an afternoon in there as well. On the women's, it's a twilight and a night on the Friday, and then the Saturday and Sunday are all afternoon. So when we come back to why we're moving it to November, when we get into summer, the A-League has heat policy restrictions, so you can't have games too early in the day. I imagine that had to be a big factor in this. We're trying to cram all these games into 2 stadiums, remember? So all the men are being played at Allianz, all the women's at Leichhardt Oval. So if you want to cram these games in, then it has to be done earlier in the day, simple as that. And when you're thinking about television audiences as well, it seems to make a lot of sense, Jacob.
Yeah, and I think that this is a case of what I was saying before, of they looked at what didn't work last year, and that was, having a bunch of different venues, teams of the same club playing on the same day, so fans couldn't necessarily attend both games, things like that. And they've gone, right, let's simplify it as much as we can. Let's have the 2 venues, one for men's, one for women's, separate clubs onto different days. And then it's a case of, right, we can't feasibly do that in a January or a February because of, the heat policies. It's going to be hotter. We can't play, 12 o'clock, 1 p.m. games. We'll have to move it earlier in the season. It seems like a good move. Simplifies things for fans, simplifies things for the clubs. I think it's a good move.
Touch wood, we don't have anything unseasonably hot because the wet bowl policy will still apply, and that may see games pushed back. But hey, both stadiums have got great lighting, and no one minds a late night if it's the double headers of football, right?
I think Paletti has locked in that exact prediction for round 6.
Yeah, already.
Bonus points to them.
What was that about English people being pessimists?
Too right. All right. Well, that will do on Unite Round. A lot of positives so far, so I can see. I'm really looking forward to it as well. Let's get stuck into some transfer news, and the big one off the print this week is that Bojidar Kraev makes the move from Wellington to Western Sydney. We know he had an offer on the table from the Knicks. He's been a key player for them over 2 seasons. as we always say, with success comes attention in the A-League. So you're going to lose a key player like that. It does sometimes happen. However, Christian, you would have hoped if you were Wellington that it wouldn't be to a competitor in the A-League. It would have been hopefully overseas, but he has gone to Western City, and that is strengthening a rival.
It is strengthening a rival, but not a rival that you'd imagine that they'll be competing with the Knicks at the top of the table. If last season's anything to go by. Marco Rudan, obviously, he's out the door. So they've sort of got a new setup in the coaching staff, and you'd think their squad might, change up a bit in the off-season. It already has with a few departures and signings. So who knows if they're able to improve on last season and get close to the Knicks. But I think Wellington have enough pieces around them at the moment for Giancarlo Italiano to work with. His system's not going to really change its had too much, you think, even with this departure of Crave, who, like you touched on, a very important figure, not only last season, but the year before, just providing that, stability in the attacking third where, he's got that bit of creative spark about him. Yes, it'll be a big loss for the Knicks, but, to give him, to a rival, yes, not ideal again. But, I think he'll fit in nicely with the Wanderers. I guess, they've got a few promising young players, in that setup. I think he can thrive really well. He's only, 27 years of age. He's still got a few good years left in him, you think, in the A-League. So, but yeah, from a Knicks perspective, I wouldn't be, sort of worried that great a deal, to be honest.
Fair enough. Well, the Central Coast Mariners have made a few moves as well, trying to recoup some of their losses from their historic season. Chris, I know you've just made it clear how much you don't care about them, so I'm going to hand this one to you. First of all, off the rack is Adam Pavlicic, a 21-year-old goalkeeper who was on the bench for Sydney FC. He came on when Redmayne had that suspension during the year, so we've seen a little bit of him. Brother of Anthony, who is the other Australian at Bayern Munich. Both he and Iran Kunda were training with the senior team today, by the way, which is very cool to see two Aussies in a big European team. But he comes in, he's going to be their starting keeper. That seems a big tick straight out of the Mariners playbook. Miguel DiPizio signs on for 2 more years, the super sub from the grand final, and a couple of other occasions as well last year. And then a really interesting one, Diesel Harrington, 19-year-old centre-back. He's Australian, but bought, well, I say bought, we don't actually know exactly, but from a Danish club. Now, the report in Denmark, the language was kind of suggesting that it was a sale that took place. He still had 2 years on his deal, potentially. But there's nothing at hand, at least in Australia, to suggest that actual money has changed hands. You wouldn't imagine that the Central Coast would be spending a lot of money right now on a 19-year-old centre-back, but who knows?
That's an interesting one. It sort of came a little bit out of the blue very late. I think there'll be a bit more to come on Harrington and what the story is behind it. But Pavlicic, obviously, the Central Coast have made a habit of developing and growing good young goalkeepers, identifying them, getting them into their squad. He's played for Australia youth level. He's come through the John Crawley Academy, which we know has a pretty good strike rate if John Crawley's recommending them out to that next level. And apparently he's come very highly recommended by him. So he's going to be a name to watch. It's interesting because the Mariners had a couple of other goalkeepers in their ranks that were biding some time and playing some game time last year at different points. So he'll be an interesting one to sort of watch how he comes along. But he's obviously highly touted if the Mariners have gone out and swung for him when they've got a couple of development keepers in their ranks. But it's a big hole to fill and some big gloves to step into. It'll be interesting to see how he goes.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can make a Denmark little segue here, we're going to go international, Jacob, for a man that you're very familiar with. Mo Toure has signed in Denmark from France. A nice little move for him.
Yeah, the thing with Mohamed Toure is that he was very highly rated by Will Still, who was the manager at Rennes until like the end of last season, and he departed there. But yeah, was rated very highly by him. And sort of with the new manager coming in, there was always a big question mark over, well, how is this guy going to handle, the youth prospect of the former coach? Does he still have the same vision for him, getting him into the first team, this season sort of thing? And clearly the case was no, but rather than him just sitting around rotting in the youth team or the second team, they've gone, look, you're not going to get minutes here, so we're going to get you somewhere else. And Branders have stepped in. Obviously they've signed Paul Izzo as well, so there's going to be a bit of an Australian link up there as well, which will be nice for him to at least have a familiar face there. But seems like a good move. 4 years is it's a pretty decent contract to get, and it's not the sort of worry that we've seen with some players when they go overseas and they get these short contracts, and it's like, well, if they get one injury, then they're done for, right? Because they're not going to get minutes, and then the team's not going to re-sign them. It's a case of, nah, all right, Rounders are going to give him some time to bed him into the team, and I reckon it's the sort of level that he could play pretty comfortably at. So no, I'm excited to see how it goes moving forwards, because we've seen the talent that he does have, and it's about just sort of I guess finding that consistency, getting it out of him on a regular basis, and hopefully this will be the spot where he can do that and kick on, and who knows, maybe become a regular Socceroos starter in the future.
Well, someone else who is hoping to be a regular Socceroos starter, who's also picked up a 4-year deal, Christian, is Riley McGree at Middlesbrough in the Championship. We know how good he can be when he is fit, but hopefully just some consistency. They obviously believe in him at a good Championship club. Really positive for Riley.
Yeah, great for him to get that consistency under his belt, knowing that, okay, he signed this extra 4-year deal. His future's certain, because at the Socceroos, he's been sort of knocking on the door for, he's been starting a few games, but to really nail himself in the starting 11, I think just to keep playing abroad in England for Middlesbrough, keep getting that experience in his game, keep developing over there is obviously a great thing for his career moving forward. Still a lot of time on his side, and I think from a Socceroos perspective in that sort of midfield battle, he's definitely a really key talent that Arnold is going to think, okay, if Riley can, I guess, keep getting some consistent minutes at Middlesbrough, keep performing at the high standard that I know he's capable of producing at, then I think, he's definitely one to put his hand up for the World Cup as, a genuine starter, and including the World Cup qualifiers. So, for all parties concerned, it's really good news.
100%. And of course, he is familiar with the US as well. Was signed for Charlotte for 12 months. Hold on, he never played a game. Never mind.
Didn't play for them. Yeah.
But he was on their books, which is another interesting story. Elsewhere internationally, Matty Ryan has the official tick from Roma. He is done. He is sold. And then Tyrese Francois as well has a here we go from Fabrizio. He was released from Fulham, young Australian midfielder, signed for Wigan in League One. So a nice move for him as well. Coming back to the A-League, Perth Glory have made a couple of signings. I think they must be up to 10 or 11 now. They've really been busy. Hiroki Aoyama was a player at, I believe, Apia Leichhardt. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. He was over there for a trial. He's impressed, so he's got a tick for 1 year. And then Nikola Milejusnic as well from the Brisbane Roar. They're really filling up their squad with some young, youthful players.
Yeah, they're certainly making some additions. It's going to be interesting to see how that builds out. Obviously, a change of the guard and replacing a few key players. They've had some departures that were confirmed really early in the off-season, heading to other clubs in the A-League. So they had some seats to fill, and they're starting to do that now. And it's a really exciting time of the year, I think, more broadly for the A-League, because it's when we start seeing where these, deck chairs in the musical chairs game of Australian football end up landing. There's lots of rumours, lots of pieces happening, and we're slowly getting to that point and, closing in on, a couple of months out from the season.
Absolutely. And then the other big marquee signing to Melbourne City is 28-year-old Argentine German Ferreira. I haven't seen a wink of him playing football, but is reportedly a versatile midfield and defender, so he feels like a kind of depth pick, Jacob, that could play across different positions. He's played across Argentina, Uruguay and Russia in his career. He was an Argentine youth international. Interesting pick for Melbourne City, but they obviously have a pretty depthful scouting network. I'm sure he'll come in and do a job.
Well, you say that, we haven't seen much from him playing football, but the one thing we have seen is that neck tattoo, which,
oh yeah,
my goodness, I
was going to mention that.
That is a bold one. Yeah, that is. I hope he gets on the pitch just so we get a glimpse of that on TV, because, that is bold.
Feisty South American.
But no, it seems like a very Melbourne City signing of the last couple of years. They've had a couple of these players come in who nobody's really heard of. They've come from overseas somewhere. They've played a few minutes and then they've gone back. They had Fernandez last season, the fullback from Chile, who played a few minutes and he's gone back again. And now they've got Ferreira in, who we've heard nothing about before and will probably play some minutes and then go back. So it's a very where you see Mariners sort of looking at these really young prospects that they can build up and having a long-term plan. For City, it's more of a case of, well, we just need some depth picks and we've got some free spots with visa players, so why not get somebody experienced in, just for, a season or two. They even did it with the likes of, like Van der Ven, for instance, who was actually a really quality player, but, plays a season, he leaves, they have to replace him. It's sort of a revolving door, but somehow they managed to make it work for the most part. But their big issue is going to be obviously big loss of Tolgay Arslan recently, and obviously Ferreira's not going to fill in that spot because he's a defensive player. But that could be another area on the pitch where we see them make this sort of signing. So I can't speak a huge amount about what he's going to offer to the team because, like you, Lockie, I've not actually seen him play before. There was a little highlights package that City put out on social media of some tackles and things that he'd made, but of course those are going to be cherry picked of his best moments. They're not going to make him look like a spud on their social media. But if that's the level that he can play at, then he looks to be a very solid pick.
100%.
Look, Jacob, I'll be honest. If he can hit the highs of the last tattooed madman that was signed by a Melbourne club, Alessandro Diamanti, even if it's just the social media clicks, I'm sure Melbourne City will be more than happy with their investment if it's on the field as well. Because, as you said, that tattoo is going to be the standout talking point for a lot of people. And if he does shine, he'll become a cult hero very quickly if he goes well.
Absolutely. And, you're right, Jacob. They lose Jamie McLaren, the league's all-time goal scorer. They lose Tolgay Arslan, who we can probably argue now one of the best one-season A-League players of all time, easily, right?
Yeah.
So very big holes to fill. The other transfer window note that we should make just before we went to air tonight, Lockie Rose has mutually terminated his deal with MacArthur, so his destination is unknown at this point, at least as we're recording. I imagine it won't be too long before we find out. These mutual terminations tend to move quite quickly. But a foundation bull goes by the wayside. Elsewhere, Melbourne City have been drawn against Filipino side Kaya Iloilo and Thai side the College of Asian Scholars, which has a wicked badge, by the way. Go look it up. I'm not going to give you any spoilers. In the first edition of the Women's Asian Champions League, there is a preliminary stage before this group stage, which City have been drawn into. There'll be groups of 4, and then their single round-robin group stage will be held in Thailand in early October. So, Christian, very exciting times. Proper, structured continental football for the women's game.
Yeah, finally a bit of consistency with the structure this time around for the women's game. Champions League competition in Asia. It's interesting how obviously that round-robin group stage is going to be held in Thailand. It's not going to be sort of like a home and away series like we see in the men's sort of group stage. But nonetheless, you've still got all those teams, playing in the one neutral venue. That'll be interesting to see how that all unfolds. And hopefully Melbourne City can represent Australia well on the Asian scene.
Yeah, so I did my AFC competition structure degree when we had to deal with the AFC Cup last year, so I'm pretty sure I've got this right. But in terms of hosting games, the one opportunity that City will have is if they top their group, they will be guaranteed to be the highest ranked team in their quarterfinal, which will be hosted by the highest ranked team. So if they win the group, they definitely host a quarterfinal in Melbourne. If they come second or third in the group, I'm not sure. It's a bit up in the air. But when we get to the semis and finals, it's again centralised. So,
and is that a one leg or 2 legs? Sorry.
1 leg.
1 leg, okay.
1 leg quarterfinal, and then the semi-finals will go to neutralised as well, Chris.
Have they announced centralised and neutralised venues for semi-finals and finals? Is there any chance for the wonderful people at the APL/Football Australia/Melbourne City?
I think they have. I can't remember who it is off the top of my head, but I think they have confirmed.
It's obviously not Australia.
It's not Australia, no. So just the one chance to host a game, which is a little silly, and there will be plenty of teams that go throughout this tournament and don't host a game, which is unfortunate, but the women's game is growing and that will have to come soon. But you know who is hosting a game, Jacob? It's Adelaide Oval and South Australia. The Socceroos are heading back to the City of Churches. Or is that one of those things that was in Gatherand that we're not allowed to call them, the City of Churches, something like that? But they are going back for the first time in 7 years. They will play China in the next round of World Cup qualifiers. The same opponent, ironically, that the Matildas played there just a couple of weeks ago. But, you know, the national team is very rich with South Australian talent at the moment. Shout out Antonis, hashtag SA Great. They're going very well at the moment, and you're getting a national team game again.
It's crazy it's been 7 years. It feels like that long as well, to be honest. It's been a long, long time since the Socceroos have been down here. But no, looking forward to it. Should be great. And the one big criticism that people have had has gone, oh, why are you playing it at the Oval? Why isn't it at Hindmarsh? And I like the comments that Arnie made where he was like, well, because we reckon we can fill it. And, you know, could you imagine 50, 60,000 people out there for the Socceroos? We know we can get it with the Matildas. Why can't we get it with the men as well? Especially with a team that, like you said, Lockie, has a lot of SA talent in there. You know, it's the return of Craig Goodwin. The prodigal son comes home, which will be fantastic.
He might not. Depends if his ribs are sorted.
Yeah, that's true. He'll be there in spirit at least. But no, it should be great. The national teams at least have really sort of made strides in popularizing football in this country, which I think is something that we all want, right? We want people to care about the sport. We want people to, you know, get around it. And we saw it with the World Cup couple of years ago with the Socceroos, how when they were performing well, the whole country got around them. We've seen it recently with the Matildas, the whole country gets around them. There's a chance to do it again and show that, yeah, the whole country is around them because they sell out Adelaide Oval. And I really do hope they sell out and it's not a 27, 28, 29, 30,000 like it was last time. Properly get it up there, 40, 50, 60,000. That would be fantastic, because it would be a great atmosphere and a great showcase of, you know, how far not just football has come, but, you know, in terms of, you know, South Australia as well, in like, you know, the talent that they will have on the pitch with the players, and things like that. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. I'm really excited for it, and hopefully it means that we're seeing more of the love being shared around for the national teams, right? And that it's not just centralized in your Sydneys and your Melbournes now. You know, they're sort of branching out and giving the whole country a taste of it.
Benefit of this format is, of course, we have 5 home games as well to share around, so we got more football. And Chris, I do have to imagine, though, that the presence of Nestori Irankunda in or out of the squad list will probably be a large factor in how many people turn up.
Yeah, it certainly will be. And realistically, as Jacob touched on, Hindmarsh, I think, is 16,000, 17,000 capacity. So long as we're doubling that, like ideally we want to be selling out, but it's a bit like when we have big games in Melbourne. We don't take them to Amy Park or even to Etihad. We go to the MCG when we've got these big events. And this is a big event. This is a huge opportunity for us to qualify for the next World Cup. This is a game that the Socceroos should have lots of local talent, should be well favoured to win in terms of against China. China are a side that obviously there's a lot of Chinese expats in Australia as well that'll draw in. So there's no reason we shouldn't be able to sell it out. But again, to put it in any other venue that was less than that would be significantly underselling the game. And if you want to play a Socceroos game at Hindmarsh, then you're going to get maybe an Indonesia or a Bahrain next time around. So I think realistically you want the bigger tier games in one of our, you know, 5 or 6 biggest cities versus, you know, we look at Bahrain, they've gone to the Gold Coast for obvious reasons, opportunity, venue availability, all those sorts of things.
100%. Very exciting times to be South Australian and getting more national team action.
It's not said often, exciting times to be South Australian.
not in July.
Yeah.
Well, that will do for this episode of the Roundball Australia podcast, because hopefully I've done a good job of hiding it, but I'm very quickly losing the ability to speak. A big thank you to Deploy Football for supporting our show and our coverage of the beautiful game in Australia. Christian Montegan, thank you very much for tonight.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Jacob Stevens, have you got your Adelaide United membership so you can get your free tickets as well, or priority access or whatever it is?
I haven't got my membership, no. I probably need to do that, yeah. Get my free Unite Round tickets. But yeah, it's good to be back on the pod in a non-hosting capacity. It's a bit more chill this time round.
Don't you get the Adelaide United members get? Is it just pre-access to the Socceroos tickets as well, something like that?
Yeah, I think it's like a pre-sale thing for registered members. Yeah.
Yeah, all right, Reds fans, get on it. And Chris Macpherson, it's been very nice to have you back again.
They're wonderful to be back. I've got my Jet membership. I'm ready to go. If I don't, get the call up on the microphone.
Do they get you into the Australia Cup next week as well?
Not in Darwin, no, because I'm not heading that far. So hopefully they can get the win, and we'll see everyone down at Rockdale Island.
All right, very nice. Thank you, everyone at home, very much for listening. We'll be back on Tuesday with a full preview of the Women's Olympic Games tournament. And then, of course, on Friday as well, we have more A-League teams to talk about. The Australia Cup playoffs in Darwin, as Chris just mentioned, will have happened. So we get our first look in pre-season at some of these teams. Very exciting times. Unfortunately, the counter still does say 90 days till the start of the season, but plenty of football until then. Thank you all very much again for listening. Goodbye.